Well, the siren of Texas. Nature has a cruel sense of humor, and nowhere is this more evident than in the heart of the Texas Hill Country near the town of Wimberley. Imagine a day so hot the air feels like a physical weight on your shoulders, and the sun is a relentless hammer beating down on the scorched earth. You stumble upon a hidden oasis where the water is so impossibly clear it looks like a liquid sapphire nestled in the limestone. It looks like a portal to another world, or a cool embrace from the heavens themselves. You see children jumping into the black void of the center, and for a moment, everything feels perfect and cinematic, like a scene from a dream you do not want to wake up from. But this is where the deception begins, because Jacob's Well is not a playground, but a vertical chimney leading into one of the most treacherous underwater cave systems on the entire planet. Before we dive into the abyss, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another journey into the heart of danger. I have always found it fascinating how humans are drawn to things that can kill them, and Jacob's Well is the ultimate testament to that dark curiosity. From the surface, it looks like a harmless swimming hole only 30 feet deep, but that is just the mouth of the beast. Beneath that initial chamber lies a labyrinth of narrow passages and deceptive tunnels that have claimed at least 12 lives, although some say the number is much higher. It is a place where the line between adventure and suicide becomes blurred by the sheer beauty of the surroundings. If you ask me, there is something deeply unsettling about a place that invites you in with a smile, only to swallow you whole once you turn your back on the light. It is like a siren song made of water and stone. The geology of this place is a masterclass in architectural malice. The well is fed by the Trinity Aquifer, and for thousands of years, the pressure of the water carved out a series of chambers deep underground. The first chamber is a straight drop into a world of vibrant greens and blues. But as you descend into the second chamber, which sits around 80 feet down, the atmosphere shifts from magical to claustrophobic. This is where the danger becomes physical. The second chamber contains a false chimney, a narrow opening that looks like a way out, but instead leads into a dead end. Divers in a state of nitrogen narcosis often find themselves wedged into these cracks, unable to turn around and unable to go forward. It is a slow, terrifying realization that the earth has quite literally grabbed hold of you and will not let go. The third chamber is even more sinister because it is filled with loose silt and gravel. Imagine being over 100 feet below the surface in total darkness, where your only lifeline is the limited air on your back. You move your fin just a fraction of an inch too much, and suddenly the crystal clear water turns into what divers call brown milk. This is a total silt out, where visibility drops to zero in a heartbeat. You cannot see your hands, you cannot see your gauges, and you cannot see the exit. You are suspended in a liquid tomb where up feels like down, and the silence is loud enough to drive you insane. In my opinion, this is the ultimate nightmare, because your own survival instincts become your enemy, and the more you panic, the more air you consume, and the faster the clock ticks toward zero. There is a fourth chamber that very few have ever seen, and even fewer have returned from. To reach it, you have to squeeze through a neck so narrow that divers have to remove their oxygen tanks and push them ahead of themselves just to fit through the gap. Think about that for a second. You are hundreds of feet into the earth, and you are voluntarily separating yourself from your only source of breath just to see what is on the other side. This is where the hubris of man meets the cold indifference of nature. One of the most famous tragedies here involved the young man whose equipment became tangled in the tightest part of the cave. His partner tried to pull him out, but the silt rose up and blinded them both. The partner had to make the agonizing choice to leave his friend behind as the last bubbles of air escaped into the ceiling of the cave. When recovery teams finally reached him weeks later, they found his fingernails had been worn down to the bone from trying to claw his way through the rock. The physics of what happens to the human body in these depths is a gruesome reality check. As you go deeper, the pressure of the water compresses the air in your lungs, making it feel like you are breathing through a straw. At the same time, the nitrogen in your blood begins to act like a drug, causing a sensation similar to being heavily intoxicated. This is the martini effect. and it is why so many experienced divers make fatal mistakes. They feel a sense of euphoria and invincibility, even as their oxygen levels hit the red zone. They start to think they can hold their breath just a little longer, or that the passage ahead is wider than it looks. It is a chemical betrayal by your own brain. When the air finally runs out, the physiological response is a violent struggle as the carbon dioxide builds up in the blood. The urge to breathe becomes an uncontrollable reflex, and the victim eventually inhales the very water they were so eager to dive into. The lungs fill with liquid, and the lights go out in the middle of a dark, cold Texas cave. I think the most haunting thing about Jacob's Well is that despite the warning signs and the history of death, people still flock there every summer. They stand on the edge of the limestone ledge and look down into that deep blue eye, thinking it could never happen to them. It is a classic example of human exceptionalism. We see the danger, we read the stories, and we still think we are the exception to the rule. But the well does not care about your experience or your confidence. It is a geological machine designed by time to trap anything that wanders too deep. There are signs posted deep underwater with a picture of the Grim Reaper, warning divers to turn back. But for some, those signs are just a challenge. Every time I see footage of someone jumping into that hole, I feel a chill down my spine, because I know what lies beneath that beautiful surface. It is a reminder that the most beautiful things in this world are often the most lethal. Nature does not owe us safety, and it certainly does not owe us a way out. Jacob's Well is a masterpiece of deception, a sapphire lure that hides a throat of jagged stone and suffocating darkness. It is a place where the sun never reaches, and where the only sound is the rhythmic thumping of your own heart, until even that fades away into the permanent silence of the aquifer. It is a beautiful way to die, and that is exactly why it is so terrifying. If you ever find yourself in Wimberley on a hot July afternoon, by all means, enjoy the view, but remember that the well is always hungry, and it has all the time in the world to wait for its next guest. The stories of the bodies recovered from the well are the stuff of local legend. Divers have found cameras with the final photos of the victims still on the film, showing the blurred images of the cave walls as the light faded. They have found notes scratched into the silt and equipment abandoned in a desperate attempt to lose weight and escape the grip of the narrow passages. It is a graveyard with a view, and yet the lure remains as strong as ever. Is it the thrill of the unknown? Or is it just that we as a species are addicted to the edge of the abyss? Whatever the reason, Jacob's Well stands as the first entry on our list because it perfectly encapsulates the theme of this journey, the lethal camouflage of the natural world. It is the perfect trap, and it is waiting for you with its crystal clear eyes wide open. The Strid, the killing brook of Yorkshire. There is a place in the heart of northern England where the landscape looks like it was lifted directly from the pages of a romantic 19th century novel. In the shadows of the ruins of Bolton Abbey, the River Wharfe flows through a lush green valley where ancient oaks lean over the water and the air smells of damp earth and blooming heather. It is a place for picnics, for quiet reflection, and for families to spend their Sunday afternoons. But as you walk along the riverbank, you will notice a strange phenomenon. The wide, peaceful river suddenly narrows into a channel so small that a child could almost leap across it. This is the Strid, and it is quite possibly the most deceptive and lethal stretch of water on the entire planet. It looks like a babbling brook, but it is in fact a vertical abyss of churning rage that has a 100% fatality rate. If you fall into the Strid, you do not swim out, you do not get rescued, and you do not survive. It is a watery grave that hides its true nature behind a mask of mossy rocks and sparkling foam. I often think about how our eyes betray us when it comes to the power of nature. We are evolved to judge danger by scale, and we assume that a narrow stream cannot be as dangerous as a wide ocean. But the Strid is a masterclass in lethal physics. You see, the River Wharfe is a powerful body of water, and as it reaches this specific limestone formation, the entire volume of that wide river is forced into a gap that is barely 6 feet across. It does not simply get faster, it turns on its side. The river becomes a deep vertical gorge carved into the rock, where the water is not flowing over the ground, but is instead a massive high-pressure hydraulic system hidden beneath the surface. It is as if the Earth decided to create a meat grinder and then covered it with beautiful scenery, just to see who would be foolish enough to step too close. The technical reason for the Strid's lethality is a phenomenon known as undercutting. Over thousands of years, the sheer force of the water has eaten away at the limestone banks beneath the waterline. When you stand on the edge of the Strid, you think you are standing on solid ground, but in reality, you are often standing on a thin shelf of rock that hangs over a dark, roaring cavern. Below your feet, the water has carved out deep hollows and jagged crevices that act like a giant vacuum. If you slip, the current does not just carry you downstream, it sucks you down and under the very rocks you were just standing on. There is no surface to reach because the ceiling of your prison is the very ground you just fell from. It is a level of claustrophobia that is almost impossible to wrap the mind around. You are trapped in a lightless, high-speed washing machine of freezing water and stone. To understand the physics of what happens to a human body in the Strid, you have to understand the aeration of the water. Because the river is crashing through such a narrow and jagged space, it is filled with millions of tiny air bubbles. This might sound harmless, but it changes the density of the water. In highly aerated water, you lose all buoyancy. Even if you are a world-class swimmer or are wearing a life jacket, you will sink like a stone because the water is not dense enough to support your weight. You cannot get a grip on anything because the rocks are coated in a slick layer of algae that is as slippery as ice. The moment you hit that water, you are at the mercy of a force that exerts thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch. It is not just drowning, it is a physical assault by the elements. In my opinion, the most terrifying aspect of the Strid is the psychological trap it sets for the unwary. People see the gap and they think it is a challenge. They think they can jump across it to prove their bravery or to get a better photo for their social media. But the rocks are always damp from the mist, and the distance is always further than it looks due to the optical illusions created by the rushing water. One slip is all it takes. There is a famous story from 1841 of a young man who tried to leap the gap and failed. And since then, the list of victims has only grown. In 1998, a honeymooning couple decided to take a walk by the river. They were seen by witnesses walking hand in hand near the edge. They were never seen alive again. It took days for the recovery teams to find their bodies trapped in the labyrinth of caves beneath the surface. The water had stripped them of their clothes and their dignity, leaving only the cold reality of a tragic mistake. The physiology of death in the Strid is a violent and rapid process. First comes the cold shock response, which causes an involuntary gasp for air. If your head is underwater at that moment, you will inhale a lethal amount of liquid into your lungs immediately. Then comes the struggle against the turbulence. The water is so powerful that it can dislocate joints and break bones against the jagged limestone walls. You are being tossed around in total darkness, hitting walls you cannot see, while the current pins you into a crevice or drags you into an undercut. Your muscles quickly fatigue in the freezing temperatures, and as your body temperature drops, your coordination vanishes. Within minutes, you are no longer a person fighting for life, but an object being processed by the river. It is a brutal, indifferent end that happens just a few feet away from people walking their dogs and eating ice cream. I find it deeply symbolic that the Strid is located so close to an abbey. It is a place of spiritual beauty and ancient history, but it sits right next to a literal gateway to the underworld. It is a reminder that no matter how much we think we have tamed the world with our bridges and our paths, the wild remains just as predatory as it was thousands of years ago. The signs around the Strid are blunt and numerous. They warn you that the banks are unstable, that the water is deep, and that people have died here. Yet every year, someone decides that the rules do not apply to them. They see the beauty and they forget the beast. They think they are looking at a brook when they are actually looking at a horizontal waterfall of immense power. The local folklore surrounding the river is filled with tales of the boy of Egremont, the young heir to the estate who supposedly drowned here in the 12th century while trying to jump the gap with his greyhound on a leash. The story goes that the dog balked at the last second, pulling him into the abyss. Whether the story is entirely true or not, it speaks to a fundamental truth about this place. The Strid does not care about your status, your age, or your intentions. It is a geological accident that happens to be perfectly designed to kill. It is the ultimate don't judge a book by its cover of the natural world. If the ocean is a shark that you can see coming, the Strid is a trapdoor spider waiting in the grass. When you stand by the Strid, you can actually feel the vibration of the water through the soles of your shoes. It is a low-frequency hum that speaks of a power far beyond human comprehension. It is the sound of the earth being slowly eaten away. If you look closely at the water, you can see the whirlpools forming and vanishing in an instant, each one a miniature vortex capable of pulling a grown man under. It is a mesmerizing sight, but it is also a warning. My advice to anyone visiting this part of Yorkshire is to stay well behind the safety lines and to respect the silence of the river. The Strid does not roar like a massive waterfall. It hisses and gurgles like it is whispering a secret. But that secret is always the same. It is the sound of the end. In the grand scheme of our list, the Strid represents the danger of the mundane. It is not a volcano or a desert or a peak in the Himalayas. It is a stream in an English park. And that is exactly why it is so high on the scale of lethality. It catches you with your guard down. It waits for that moment of overconfidence when you think you can handle a little bit of water. It is a reminder that nature is not our friend, and it is not a backdrop for our lives. It is a system of forces that we are merely guests in. The Strid is a beautiful green and gray nightmare, a liquid throat that has been swallowing the curious for centuries, and it shows no signs of stopping. It is the perfect example of why you should never trust a river that looks like it is standing still. It isn't standing still. It is gathering its strength for the next person who thinks they can fly. Lake Natron, the Medusa of Tanzania. Imagine a landscape so alien and so starkly beautiful that you might believe you have stepped off the earth and onto the surface of a distant blood-red planet. In the northern reaches of Tanzania, near the border with Kenya, lies a body of water that defies every expectation of what a lake should be. From an airplane, it looks like a vast, shimmering mirror of crimson and pink, stained with swirls of white salt, like the marble of some ancient, forgotten temple. It is surrounded by the scorched plains of the Rift Valley and the towering shadow of Old Doinyo Lengai, the only volcano on Earth that erupts with carbonatite lava. This is Lake Natron, and it is quite possibly the most macabre laboratory of nature. While most lakes are sources of life, Lake Natron is a source of preservation through death. It is a place where the water does not just take your life, it claims your form, turning living creatures into calcified statues that look like they were carved by a mad sculptor. This is nature at its most gothic and its most unforgiving. And if you ask me, there is nothing more hauntingly poetic than a lake that turns its victims into permanent monuments of their own demise. The secret to this deadly magic lies in the chemistry of the water. Lake Natron is a salt lake, but not in the way you might expect. It is fed by mineral-rich hot springs and the runoff from the nearby volcano, which saturates the water with a high concentration of sodium carbonate decahydrate, or what we commonly call natron. This is the same substance that the ancient Egyptians used in their mummification rituals to dry out and preserve the bodies of their pharaohs. The alkalinity of the lake is staggering, with a pH level that can reach as high as 10 or 12. To put that in perspective, that is nearly the same alkalinity as household ammonia or industrial-strength bleach. The water is so caustic that it can strip the skin off an animal and the ink off a piece of paper in a matter of seconds. It is a liquid that burns not with fire, but with a chemical intensity that is almost impossible to defend against. But the chemistry is only half the story. The temperature of the lake can soar to over 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 60 degrees Celsius. Imagine stepping into a bath that is not just hot, but is actively cooking your tissues while simultaneously dissolving your proteins. It is a dual assault. The heat prepares the body, and the minerals then go to work. Because the water is so shallow and the evaporation is so extreme, the salt and minerals become incredibly concentrated. When an animal dies in the lake, or even just falls in and cannot escape, the minerals seep into the flesh and the bones. Over time, the body becomes encrusted in a hard, calcified shell. It is a literal turning to stone. When the water levels recede during the dry season, these ghostly figures are left standing on the shore like macabre decorations. I find it deeply unsettling that nature has found a way to create a permanent record of a split-second tragedy. One of the most famous accounts of this place comes from the photographer Nick Brandt, who discovered these calcified animals washed up on the shoreline. He found bats, birds, and even eagles that had been perfectly preserved down to the last feather and the last claw. He placed them back into lifelike positions to take his photographs, creating images that went viral around the world. People couldn't believe they were real. They looked like something out of a dark fantasy novel, but they were the cold, hard truth of Lake Natron. The theory is that the lake is so still and so reflective that birds become disoriented by the mirror-like surface. They fly at full speed into the water thinking they are seeing the sky, and by the time they realize their mistake, the chemical soup has already begun its work. It is a psychological trap as much as it is a physical one, and that is what makes it so terrifying to me. It is a place that uses your own senses against you. If a human were to fall into the center of Lake Natron, the experience would be something out of a horror movie. First, there would be the blinding pain as the alkaline water hit your eyes. Within seconds, the corneas would be chemically burned, causing permanent blindness. As you struggled to breathe, the caustic water would enter your nose and throat, searing the delicate membranes and causing your lungs to fill with fluid. Your skin would feel like it was being flayed alive as the high pH began to dissolve the fats and proteins in your outer layers. Because of the high salt content, you would be incredibly buoyant, making it difficult to swim or dive to escape the heat. You would be trapped on the surface like a piece of meat in a boiling, caustic stew. The sheer agony would likely cause your body to go into shock long before you actually drowned or succumbed to the heat. It is a death that is as efficient as it is cruel. Yet in the midst of all this lethality, there is a strange and beautiful exception. Lake Natron is the primary breeding ground for 3/4 of the world's population of lesser flamingos. These birds have evolved to thrive in an environment that would kill almost anything else. Their legs are covered in a tough, leathery skin that protects them from the caustic water, and they have special glands in their heads that allow them to filter out the excess salt. They build their nests on small islands of salt that rise out of the lake, safe from any land-based predators who wouldn't dare cross the burning, caustic shallows. It is a brilliant strategy for survival, but it is a high-stakes game. If a chick falls off the salt island and cannot get back up quickly, it will be claimed by the lake. This creates a landscape where vibrant pink life is surrounded by a sea of death and calcification. This contrast is what makes Natron so fascinating to me. It is the ultimate boundary between the living and the eternal. I think there is a lesson to be learned from Lake Natron about the indifference of the natural world. We like to think of nature as a motherly figure or a balanced system that provides for its creatures. But Natron is a reminder that the Earth is a chemical and geological machine. It does not care about beauty or suffering. It simply follows the laws of physics and chemistry. The lake is not trying to kill anything. It is just being what it is, a basin of volcanic minerals and desert heat. Our human reaction of horror is just that, a human reaction. To the volcano and the lake, the calcified bird is no different than a salt crystal. This perspective is humbling and honestly, a bit chilling. It reminds us that we are biological entities existing in a world of harsh, inorganic realities. There are also local legends surrounding the lake. The Maasai people who live in the region have long regarded the area with a mix of respect and trepidation. They call the nearby volcano the Mountain of God, and the lake itself is often seen as a place of spiritual power. You can imagine the stories told around fires for centuries about the water that turns creatures to stone. Long before scientists arrived with their pH strips and thermometers, The people living there knew that this was a place where the rules of life were different. They knew that to touch the water was to invite a curse, and in a way, they were absolutely right. The curse is just a matter of science, but it is no less real. Whenever I look at photos of Lake Natron, I am struck by the vibrant red color, which comes from haloarchaea, a type of microorganism that loves salt and produces red pigments during photosynthesis. It makes the lake look like it is filled with blood. It is a visual warning sign from nature, telling you to stay away. In our modern world, where we feel like every corner of the planet has been tamed and mapped, places like Lake Natron remain wild and unconquerable. You cannot build a resort here. You cannot swim here. You can only stand on the edge and wonder at the strange and terrifying ways that the Earth manifests its power. In the context of our list, Lake Natron represents the danger of chemistry. It is not a violent current or a hidden hole, but a slow and systematic destruction of the body at a molecular level. It is the Medusa of Tanzania, beautiful to look at but lethal to touch. It turns the fragile and the fleeting into the hard and the permanent. If you ever find yourself standing on the shores of this crimson sea, remember that the statues you see are not art but history, and that the water is not an invitation but a warning. It is a place where time stands still, and where the line between the world of the living and the world of the mineral is blurred into a single haunting image of a bird turned to stone. The boiling river, the Amazonian kettle. Deep within the Peruvian Amazon, where the canopy is so thick it breathes its own atmosphere and the humidity clings to your skin like a wet shroud, there exists a legend that for centuries was dismissed as mere folklore. The Spanish conquistadors returning from the heart of the jungle spoke of a river that boiled from the bottom up, as if a great serpent were breathing fire beneath the silt. For hundreds of years, scientists shrugged their shoulders and argued that such a thing was geologically impossible unless there was a massive volcano nearby, and there are no volcanoes in that part of the Amazon. But the legends were true. This is the Shenay Tempishka, which means boiled with the heat of the sun, and it is a 4-mile stretch of liquid death hidden in the most remote reaches of the rainforest. It is a place where the emerald green of the jungle meets a ghostly white mist that never dissipates, and where the sounds of the forest are often drowned out by the low, violent hiss of water reaching its breaking point. If you ask me, there is something uniquely terrifying about a river that looks like a sanctuary, but functions like a massive open-air industrial boiler. It is a place where the line between a refreshing dip and a gruesome execution is just a few inches of slippery mud. The reality of the boiling river is a nightmare for anything that breathes. In some sections, the water temperature reaches over 95 degrees Celsius, which is nearly 205 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that in perspective, that is just a few degrees shy of a rolling boil. It is a temperature that does not just burn, it deletes life. Most people associate the Amazon with predators like jaguars or anacondas. But in this specific corner of the world, the water itself is the apex predator. There are no fish here, no caimans, and no turtles. The only things that exist in the water are extremophile bacteria that thrive in conditions that would liquefy a human being. The visual of the river is deceptively beautiful, with turquoise pools and steaming rapids, but the smell gives it away, a heavy, humid scent of minerals and ancient earth that tells your lizard brain to stay as far away as possible. The science behind this phenomenon is even more fascinating and unsettling than the myths. Geologist Andres Russo was the one who finally brought this place to the world's attention, and his findings revealed a geological anomaly of epic proportions. The river is not heated by a volcano, but by a massive hydrothermal system. Essentially, the water starts as rain falling far away in the Andes Mountains. It sinks deep into the earth through faults and fractures, where it is heated by the internal energy of the planet. Under immense pressure, this superheated water is then forced back up to the surface through a series of fault lines, acting like a giant natural plumbing system. The river is quite literally the blood of the earth being pumped out of an arterial wound. This means the heat is consistent and relentless. It does not matter if it is day or night, or if it is raining or shining. The river remains a lethal conveyor belt of thermal energy. What happens to a living creature that falls into the Lake Natron is a scene of pure physiological horror. I have seen footage of small animals like frogs or monkeys losing their footing on the mossy banks and tumbling into the flow. The process is agonizingly fast. The moment the animal hits the water, its eyes are the first to go. The proteins in the corneas cook instantly, turning them a milky, opaque white. The creature is blinded in less than a second. Then the water enters the mouth and the lungs, searing the internal organs from the inside out. It is a literal sous vide of a living being. The animal continues to swim for a few seconds, driven by pure shock and adrenaline, but its muscles are already beginning to break down. The heat denatures the proteins in the limbs, causing them to stiffen and fail. Eventually, the animal loses the ability to keep its head above water, takes one final gulp of scalding liquid, and sinks. When the body finally floats back up or washes ashore, it is often perfectly cooked, the skin peeling away from the bone, as if it had been in a pressure cooker for hours. I find it incredibly chilling to think about the mental state of a person who might accidentally fall into this river. Imagine you are trekking through the dense undergrowth, your boots slipping on the slick leaves, and suddenly you are submerged in a liquid that is nearly boiling. The pain would be so total and so overwhelming that your brain would likely shut down into a state of shock immediately. You would be trying to swim, but your skin would be sloughing off your hands as you clawed at the muddy banks. Every breath you took would be steam and boiling spray scarring your throat and making it impossible to scream. It is a lonely, silent, and incredibly violent way to depart this world. In my opinion, the boiling river is more frightening than a volcano because a volcano gives you the warning of fire and ash. The river just looks like water until it is too late. The local shamans and the indigenous people of the Mayan-Tuyaku community have a very different relationship with the river. To them, it is a sacred site, a place of immense spiritual power. They believe the river is the home of the Yaku Mama, the mother of the waters, represented by a large boulder at the headwaters that looks like a snake's head. They use the water for healing and for brewing medicinal teas, but they do so with a level of respect and caution that we Westerners often lack. They know exactly where the water is safe to touch and where it will kill you. They have lived alongside this monster for generations, treating it as a deity that must be appeased and respected. There is a profound irony in the fact that what we see as a terrifying trap, they see as a source of life and spiritual cleansing. It shows how much our perspective is shaped by our fear of the natural world. The physical environment around the river is also a trap. Because of the intense steam, the humidity in the immediate area is nearly 100%. The air is so thick with moisture that your sweat cannot evaporate, making it impossible for your body to cool itself. You are essentially being steamed from the outside in, even if you don't touch the water. The rocks are coated in a slick layer of algae and condensation, making every step a gamble. One slip of the foot, and you are no longer a tourist or a researcher. You are a statistic. I believe that this is what makes these places so alluring and so dangerous. They look like the cradle of life, like the Garden of Eden, but they operate on rules that are fundamentally hostile to our existence. The boiling river is also a reminder of how little we actually know about our own planet. Until recently, the scientific community believed a river like this couldn't exist without a massive heat source, like a volcano, within 30 miles. The Lake Natron is hundreds of miles from the nearest volcanic center. It forces us to rewrite the textbooks on how geothermal energy works and how it can manifest in the most unexpected places. It is a reminder that the Earth is a living, breathing, and often angry entity. We are just small, fragile things walking on its surface, trying to make sense of its moods. In the context of our list, the boiling river represents the danger of temperature. It is a thermal executioner hidden in a tropical paradise. It is the ultimate manifestation of the boiling frog metaphor, except in this case, the frog doesn't have time to realize the water is getting hot. The water is already lethal. It is a place of haunting beauty where the steam rises through the trees like ghosts, and the water glows with a sickly beautiful light. If you ever find yourself in the Peruvian Amazon and you hear a low, distant roar that sounds like 1,000 kettles going off at once, do not go toward the light. The river is not inviting you for a swim. It is waiting to turn you into part of the jungle floor. It is a beautiful, boiling tragedy, and it remains one of the most enigmatic and deadly wonders of the natural world. Think about the sheer scale of the energy required to keep a 4-mile river at that temperature. It is a colossal amount of heat being generated deep within the crust. It is as if the earth is venting its rage through this one specific vein. To me, this river is a symbol of the raw, untamed power that lies just beneath our feet at all times. We walk around on this thin crust thinking we are in control, but places like the Shanay Tempishka prove that we are only here because the earth is currently allowing us to be. One shift in a tectonic plate, one change in a hydrothermal vent, and our entire environment can turn into a boiling cauldron. It is a humbling and terrifying thought to carry with you as you look at the mist rising over the water. The boiling river is a masterpiece of natural engineering, designed to remind us of our own mortality. Cave of Crystals, the subterranean kiln. Deep beneath the Chihuahuan Desert in Mexico lies a place that looks like it was designed by a cosmic architect with a penchant for high fantasy. Imagine descending 900 feet into the dark, humid bowels of the Nika mine and stepping through a heavy steel door into a chamber that defies every law of perspective. This is the Cueva de los Cristales, or the Cave of Crystals, and it is quite literally a forest of translucent white swords. Some of these selenite crystals are as thick as ancient oaks and as long as a school bus, reaching lengths of nearly 39 feet. They crisscross the cavern in a chaotic, majestic geometry that makes you feel like an ant in a giant's jewelry box. It is the closest thing to Superman's Fortress of Solitude that exists on this planet. But do not let the ethereal beauty fool you. This cave is a masterpiece of environmental hostility. It is a place where beauty and death are fused together in a high-pressure, high-temperature environment that would kill an unprotected human in less than 30 minutes. If you ask me, this is the ultimate forbidden fruit of the geological world. A place so magnificent that the mere act of looking at it is a gamble with your very life. The reason for this extreme danger is a combination of temperature and humidity that sounds like a recipe for a slow roast. The cave sits directly above a massive magma chamber that has been heating the ground for millions of years. The air temperature inside is a constant 136 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 58 degrees Celsius. On its own, that would be survivable for a short time, but the cave is also at nearly 100% humidity. This is where the physics of the cave becomes truly sinister. In normal high heat, your body survives by sweating. The sweat evaporates off your skin, which carries away heat and cools you down. But in the Cave of Crystals, the air is already saturated with all the moisture it can hold. Your sweat has nowhere to go. It just pools on your skin while your internal temperature begins to climb like a runaway freight train. You are essentially being steamed alive in a subterranean oven. But the most horrifying part of the physiology of this cave is what happens inside your chest. To understand this, you have to understand the concept of the dew point. Because the air in the cave is so incredibly hot and humid, it is actually hotter than the internal temperature of your body. When you inhale that air into your lungs, which are at a relatively cool 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the moisture in the air begins to condense. It is the exact same process that happens when you take a cold soda can out of the fridge on a hot day and it starts to sweat. In the Cave of Crystals, that condensation is happening inside your lung tissue. Every breath you take is adding liquid to your respiratory system. You are not just struggling with the heat, you are literally drowning in the air itself. It is a slow, terrifying process where your lungs fill with water from the inside out, while your brain begins to swell from the heat and your organs start to shut down. I find it deeply ironic that one of the most visually stunning places on Earth is a place where your own biology becomes a trap. When scientists first discovered the cave in the year 2000, they realized they could only stay inside for a few minutes at a time before their heart rates began to skyrocket and their vision started to blur. To study the cave, they had to develop specialized Iceman suits. These were heavy, insulated garments filled with frozen gel packs and equipped with respirators that cooled the air before it reached the lungs. Even with this state-of-the-art technology, researchers could only stay inside for about 20 minutes before they had to retreat to the safety of the cooler mine shafts. It is a place that rejects human presence with every atom of its being. It is as if the earth created this beautiful secret and then guarded it with a wall of fire and water. The story of how these crystals grew is a testament to the incredible patience of nature. For over 500,000 years, this cave was filled with mineral-rich water that was kept at a perfectly stable temperature by the magma below. This allowed the selenite crystals to grow at an agonizingly slow rate, adding the thickness of a human hair every few decades. They grew in total darkness in a silent flooded tomb for 500,000 years, until two brothers, mining for lead and silver, accidentally broke through the wall. I often wonder what must have gone through their minds when they shone their flashlights into that void and saw the shimmering white giants for the first time. They had stumbled into a geological miracle, but they had also opened a door to a kiln. Within minutes, they were gasping for air and forced to retreat their clothes, soaked not with cave water, but with their own useless sweat. There is something profoundly humbling about the Cave of Crystals. It reminds us that there are parts of this planet that were never meant for us. We like to think of ourselves as the masters of the world, but in Nyka, we are nothing but fragile intruders. The cave does not care about our cameras or our curiosity. It operates on a scale of time and energy that makes human life seem like a flickering candle in a hurricane. In my opinion, the most beautiful thing about this cave is that it has since been returned to the earth. After the mining operations ceased and the pumps were turned off in 2015, the cave was allowed to flood again. The giant crystals are once again submerged in the hot, mineral-rich water that birthed them, protected from the corrosive breath of humans. It is once again a silent, lightless kingdom of stone. I think there is a certain poetry in the fact that we can no longer go there. In an age where everything is mapped and every wonder is turned into a tourist attraction, the Cave of Crystals remains a true mystery. It is a place that exists only in our memories and in the few photographs taken by those brave enough to enter the kiln. It represents the ultimate boundary between the world of the light and the world of the deep. If the boiling river is a throat of fire and Lake Natron is a sea of salt, then the Cave of Crystals is a cathedral of heat. It is a place where the air is an enemy and the ground is a treasure. If you were to stay in the cave without a suit, your death would be a systematic collapse. First would come the confusion and the loss of motor skills as your brain began to overheat. You would feel a desperate urge to rip off your clothes, but the air touching your skin would feel like a hot iron. Your heart would beat faster and faster, trying to pump blood to the surface of your skin to cool down, but there would be no relief. Then the fluid would begin to build in your lungs, making every breath a gurgling struggle. You would eventually collapse on the jagged edges of crystals that have been growing since before the dawn of human civilization. Your body would become just another temporary feature in a room built for eternity. The Cave of Crystals is the sixth entry on our list because it combines the psychological allure of a fantasy world with the physical reality of a slaughterhouse. It is a reminder that the Earth is not just a home, but a laboratory, where conditions can turn lethal in an instant. It is a place that demands respect and offers no mercy. Whenever I see the photos of those massive white beams, I am struck by a sense of awe and a sense of dread. It is a beautiful nightmare, and it is perhaps for the best that it is now hidden once again beneath 1,000 feet of rock and water. Some secrets are too beautiful and too dangerous to be left open. The Cave of Crystals is a silent guardian of the deep, reminding us that the most incredible sights on this planet are often the ones that require the highest price to see. It is a cathedral of light in a world of darkness, and it is the most magnificent oven you will ever encounter. The Danakil Depression, the psychedelic hell of Ethiopia. If you were to dream of a landscape painted by a mad artist using a palette of neon yellows, electric greens, and burnt oranges, you might imagine a place like the Danakil Depression. Located in the northern reaches of Ethiopia, this is not just one of the most visually stunning places on the planet, it is officially the hottest inhabited place on Earth. It sits more than 300 feet below sea level in a geological rift where three tectonic plates are slowly ripping the continent of Africa apart. This is a land of extreme contradictions where the Earth is literally bleeding salt, acid, and fire. From a distance, the Dalal hydrothermal fields look like a field of wildflowers or a psychedelic coral reef that has somehow survived in the middle of a desert. But as you get closer, the shimmering beauty reveals itself to be a high-pressure laboratory of lethal chemistry. It is a place that feels alien, not just because of its colors, but because its very environment is fundamentally hostile to carbon-based life. If you ask me, the Danakil is the closest thing we have to a portal to another dimension, one where the rules of biology are replaced by the brutal laws of inorganic chemistry. It is a masterpiece of natural malevolence, a place that invites you to stare at its brilliance until your lungs begin to fail. The visual deception of the Danakil is centered around the Dalal volcano. Unlike traditional volcanoes that spew red-hot lava, Dalal is a phreatic volcano, meaning it erupts with superheated water and minerals. The vibrant yellow and green pools that dot the landscape are not filled with water, but with a concentrated brine of sulfur, iron, and potassium. These pools are so acidic that their pH level is often recorded as negative. To put that in perspective, you are looking at natural reservoirs of what is essentially battery acid. If you were to dip your hand into one of those neon green ponds, the acid would immediately begin to dissolve your skin, reacting with the moisture in your cells to produce a chemical burn that eats through tissue and bone with terrifying speed. I have always found it fascinating that nature can produce colors so inviting that our instincts tell us to touch them, even as the environment is screaming for us to run away. The atmosphere in the Danakil is just as lethal as the ground. Because of the constant tectonic and volcanic activity, the air is thick with a cocktail of toxic gases. Carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and chlorine gas seep out of the fissures in the earth, invisible and often odorless until it is too late. Chlorine gas is particularly nightmarish. When it comes into contact with the moisture in your eyes, nose, and lungs, it turns into hydrochloric acid. Imagine breathing in an invisible mist that slowly liquefies your respiratory system from the inside out. Your first symptom would be a persistent cough, followed by a burning sensation in your chest as the acid begins to sear your lung tissue. Your body would respond by flooding the lungs with fluid in a desperate attempt to dilute the acid, effectively causing you to drown in your own internal fluids while standing in the middle of a desert. It is a silent, invisible executioner that waits in the low-lying pockets of the depression. The heat in the Danakil is a physical weight that never leaves you. Temperatures regularly exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and because the depression is so low, the air is stagnant and heavy. There is no shade, no relief, and the sun reflects off the vast white salt flats, creating a glare that can burn your retinas if you are not careful. In this environment, heat stroke is not just a possibility, it is an inevitability for the unprepared. Your internal cooling system simply cannot keep up. Your heart rate spikes as your body tries to pump blood to the surface to cool down. But the air is hotter than your blood. Your organs begin to overheat, leading to a cascade of failure that starts with confusion and ends with a total collapse of the nervous system. In my opinion, the Danakil is a place that tests the very limits of what a human being can endure. It is a furnace that doesn't just burn your skin, it tries to unmake your entire biological structure. One of the most haunting features of the Danakil is the Erta Ale volcano, known by the local Afar people as the Gateway to Hell. It is one of the few places on Earth with a persistent lava lake, a churning cauldron of molten rock that has been active for over a century. Standing on the rim of Erta Ale at night, watching the crust of the lava lake crack and reveal the glowing red veins of the earth below, you realize how thin the shell we live on actually is. The heat rising from the pit is so intense, it feels like it is peeling the moisture from your eyeballs. There are no guardrails here, no safety nets. One slip on the loose volcanic rock, and you would become a permanent part of the magma chamber in a matter of seconds. It is a raw, unshielded look into the heart of the planet, and it is as terrifying as it is beautiful. Despite this hostility, the Danakil is not empty. The Afar people have lived here for centuries, mining the salt that covers the floor of the depression. They call it white gold. Every day they lead caravans of camels across the blistering heat to hand-carve blocks of salt from the earth, working in conditions that would kill most people within hours. I find their resilience to be one of the most incredible stories of human survival. They have adapted to a place that the rest of the world considers a wasteland. They move through the acid pools and the toxic vapors with a casual grace that belies the danger of their home. To them, the Danakil is not a psychedelic hell, it is a workplace. But even for the Afar, the desert is a jealous master that demands a high price for its treasures. The physiology of death in the Danakil is a multifaceted assault. If the heat doesn't get you, the gas will. If you avoid the gas, the acid pools are waiting. It is a place where you have to be right every single second, while the environment only has to be right once. If you were to lose your way in the salt flats during a dust storm, the disorientation would be total. The white ground and the white sky would merge into a single, featureless void. You would begin to dehydrate at a rate of nearly 2 liters of water per hour. As your blood thickens, your heart has to work harder and harder to pump it through your veins, leading to a rapid onset of exhaustion and hallucinations. You might see shimmering lakes of blue water on the horizon, only to find they are nothing but mirages, or worse, pools of caustic brine. I think the Danakil Depression is the ultimate example of the Earth's indifference to us. We look at it and see a beautiful, alien landscape, but the Earth is just doing its job, venting heat and minerals as tectonic plates dance their slow, violent dance. The colors aren't there to be pretty. They are the result of chemical reactions that have been happening for millions of years. It is a reminder that we are guests on a planet that is still under construction. The Danakil is a work in progress, a place where the crust is being torn apart and remade, and it has no room for the fragile requirements of human life. It is the 6th entry on our list because it is the most complete package of natural lethality we have found so far. It combines fire, acid, heat, and poison into a single, breathtakingly beautiful nightmare. When you stand in the middle of Dalal, surrounded by the hissing of steam vents and the smell of rotten eggs from the sulfur, you feel a deep, primal sense of dread. It is the feeling of being somewhere you are not supposed to be. It is the feeling of being an intruder in a world of minerals. My advice to anyone who dreams of seeing the Danakil is to remember that you are looking at the Earth in its most raw and honest form. It is beautiful, yes, but it is the beauty of a predator. It is a psychedelic dream that can turn into a terminal reality in the time it takes to draw a single, poisoned breath. The Danakil Depression is a masterpiece of the macabre, a vibrant, glowing reminder that some of the most spectacular sights in our world are best viewed from a very safe distance. It remains a crown jewel of geological danger, a place where the Earth is angry, beautiful, and absolutely, undeniably lethal. Lake Nyos, the silent ghost of Cameroon. Imagine a quiet night in the lush green mountains of northwest Cameroon. The year is 1986, and the moon is hanging low over the rolling hills and the deep emerald waters of Lake Nyos. This is a volcanic crater lake, a peaceful mirror reflecting the stars, surrounded by villages where families are settling into sleep and cattle are grazing on the high slopes. There is no wind, no warning, and no sound of an explosion. But beneath that placid surface, a monster is waking up. It is not a creature of teeth and claws, but an invisible, odorless, and silent ghost made of carbon dioxide. In a matter of minutes, a massive cloud of gas bursts from the depths and rolls down the hillsides at nearly 50 miles per hour, acting like a giant invisible scythe. By the time the sun rose the next morning, over 1,700 people and 3,000 livestock were dead, lying exactly where they had stood or slept, with no marks on their bodies and no sign of a struggle. This is Lake Nyos, and it is the site of a limnic eruption, one of the rarest and most terrifying natural disasters on our planet. If you ask me, there is nothing more frightening than a killer you cannot see, smell, or hear. A predator that turns the very air you breathe into a poison that puts you to sleep forever. The science behind this tragedy is a masterclass in the patience of nature. Lake Nyos is situated in the Oku volcanic field, and deep beneath the lake bed, a pocket of magma is constantly leaking carbon dioxide into the water. In most lakes, the water turns over seasonally, allowing gases to escape safely into the atmosphere. But Lake Nyos is different. It is a meromictic lake, meaning its layers do not mix. Because the lake is incredibly deep and the tropical weather is so consistent, the cold, heavy water at the bottom remains trapped under the weight of the warmer water above. For hundreds of years, the bottom of the lake acted like a massive, pressurized soda bottle, absorbing millions of tons of carbon dioxide. The pressure at the bottom was so immense that the gas stayed dissolved, invisible and silent. But on that night in August, something triggered the bottle to open. It might have been a small landslide, a minor tremor, or even a change in water temperature. Whatever the cause, a small amount of bottom water was pushed upward. As it rose, the pressure decreased, and the gas began to bubble out of the solution. This created a chain reaction known as an overturn. Within seconds, a massive column of water and gas shot hundreds of feet into the air, and a cloud containing nearly 1.6 million tons of carbon dioxide was released into the valley. What happened next is a scene of pure, quiet horror. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air. Instead of dissipating into the sky, the gas cloud hugged the ground, flowing down the mountainside like a ghostly river of death. It was nearly 150 feet thick in some places. As it moved through the villages of Nyos, Cha, and Subum, it displaced every single molecule of oxygen. Imagine you are sleeping in your bed, and suddenly the air simply stops providing life. There is no smoke to choke on, no fire to run from. You just feel a sudden heaviness, a warmth in the air, and a strange sense of confusion. Because carbon dioxide can act as a mild anesthetic at high concentrations, many of the victims likely never even realized they were dying. They simply slipped from sleep into a permanent coma. In my opinion, the most haunting thing about this event is the survivors' accounts. Those who lived were often those on higher ground who woke up to find their entire families dead in the rooms below them. They described a smell like rotten eggs or gunpowder, which scientists believe was a small amount of sulfur mixed with the gas. But for the most part, death was a silent visitor. The physiology of what this gas does to the human body is a grim study in chemistry. When you are surrounded by a high concentration of carbon dioxide, your blood becomes flooded with the gas, a condition called hypercapnia. This causes the pH of your blood to drop, making it acidic. Your brain frantically tries to signal your lungs to breathe faster, but there is no oxygen to pull in. However, at the levels found at Lake Nyos, the gas acted like a hammer. The victims were hit with such a high concentration that they suffered from immediate respiratory failure and loss of consciousness. Some survivors reported having strange, red lesions on their skin that looked like chemical burns. For years, doctors were baffled by these marks, but later research suggested they were caused by the extreme pressure of the gas cloud or by the way the CO2 interacted with the moisture on the skin, causing a minor acidic reaction. It is a death that is clean, quiet, and absolutely total. When the recovery teams arrived, they found the villages looking exactly as they had the night before, except that every living thing, from the smallest bird to the largest bull, was a corpse. I find it deeply unsettling that Lake Nyos still sits there today, looking just as beautiful and just as calm as it did before the massacre. It is a reminder that beauty in the natural world is often a mask for a profound lack of safety. To prevent another tragedy, scientists have installed a series of massive degassing pipes that reach deep into the lake, acting like a controlled vent for the carbon dioxide. You can see them today, spraying giant fountains of water and gas into the air, a constant reminder that the monster below is still breathing. But even with these pipes, the lake is still a loaded gun. The magma chamber below is still active, and the carbon dioxide is still being pumped into the water every single day. If those pipes were to fail, or if a massive earthquake were to strike, the disaster could repeat itself. It is a place where humans have had to engineer a way to stay alive in the shadow of a silent killer. Think about the psychological impact on the survivors. They didn't just lose their families, they lost their faith in the very land they lived on. In many local traditions, the lake was already seen as a place of spirits, and the eruption was viewed as the anger of the gods or the ancestors. This cultural trauma is still felt in the region today. Many people are still afraid to return to the valley, even though the government has declared some areas safe. I don't blame them. How do you trust the air after it has once turned against you? How do you sleep in a valley knowing that a silent, invisible wave could come back at any moment? Lake Nyos is the ultimate unseen danger. It doesn't roar like a lion or crash like a waterfall. It just exists, waiting for the pressure to become too much to bear. In the context of our list, Lake Nyos represents the danger of the invisible. Most of the places we have discussed have some kind of visual warning: boiling water, red acid, or massive crystals. But Nyos is a trickster. It looks like the perfect place for a swim or a boat ride. It looks like a postcard from a tropical paradise. But it is actually a massive carbonated grave. This is why it ranks so high on our scale of lethality. It catches you when you are most vulnerable, in your sleep, in your home, in your sanctuary. It is a reminder that the Earth is not just a stage for our lives, but a complex chemical machine that doesn't care if we are breathing or not. Every time I see a photo of the degassing pipes at Nyos, I am struck by the fragility of our situation. We are essentially sticking a straw into a volcano and hoping it doesn't pop. It is a fragile peace treaty between humanity and a limnic monster. The disaster in 1986 was a wake-up call for the scientific community, leading to the discovery of similar killer lakes like Lake Manoon in Cameroon and Lake Kivu in Rwanda. These places are ticking time bombs, and they force us to realize that the ground beneath us and the water beside us are capable of betrayals we can barely imagine. Lake Nyos is a silent ghost, a beautiful emerald eye in the mountains that has seen the end of nearly 2,000 lives and is currently blinking, waiting for the next time the Earth decides to exhale. It is a masterpiece of atmospheric horror, and it remains one of the most haunting and lethal wonders of the natural world. Keep that in mind the next time you find yourself by a perfectly still lake in a volcanic crater. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes, silence is just the breath of the abyss held in check by a thin layer of water. Death Valley, the gas chamber of Kamchatka. In the far eastern reaches of Russia, on the rugged and volcanic Kamchatka Peninsula, there is a place that feels like it belongs in a dark fairy tale or a forgotten chapter of a military history book. Surrounded by the towering, snow-capped peaks of the Kikpinich volcano, there is a small, seemingly ordinary valley that stretches for about 2 kilometers. From a distance, it looks like a paradise of lush green grass and sparkling mountain streams, a hidden gem in one of the most remote wildernesses on Earth. But as you descend into this basin, you will notice something deeply disturbing. There are no birds singing. There are no insects buzzing. Instead, the ground is littered with the perfectly preserved remains of the forest's most powerful inhabitants. You might see a golden eagle with its wings spread wide, a red fox curled up as if in sleep, or even a massive brown bear slumped over in the tall grass. This is the Kamchatka Death Valley, and it is a natural gas chamber that has been running for thousands of years. It is a place where the air itself is an invisible wall of poison, and if you ask me, it is the most haunting example of a death trap in the natural world, because it uses the corpses of its victims as bait to lure in more. The discovery of this place in 1975 was a scene of pure confusion for the researchers who stumbled upon it. They found a literal graveyard where the bodies of animals did not rot as they should. The cold, toxic environment had partially mummified them. The secret to this lethality lies in the unique cocktail of volcanic gases that seeps out of the cracks in the valley floor. Unlike other volcanic areas that might just release a bit of steam or sulfur, The Kamchatka Death Valley produces a dense, heavy cloud of carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and most terrifyingly, hydrogen cyanide. This is a chemical warfare agent, the same substance used in the most notorious execution chambers of human history. Because these gases are heavier than the surrounding air, they settle into the low-lying basin, creating a thick, invisible layer of poison that sits just a few feet above the ground. It is a shallow lake of death that you cannot see until you are already standing in it. The way this valley operates is a masterpiece of dark irony. It starts with the smallest creatures. A bird might fly into the valley and dip down to drink from the stream or rest in the grass. The moment its head enters the layer of gas, it is overwhelmed. It collapses and dies within seconds. That bird then becomes a lure. A fox or a wolverine, smelling a free meal, trots down into the valley to scavenge the carcass. As soon as the predator lowers its head to eat, it too inhales the concentrated poison and falls dead right next to its prey. This creates a chain reaction. The scent of multiple dead animals eventually attracts a brown bear, the undisputed king of the Russian wilderness. The bear, confident in its size and strength, enters the valley to claim the feast. But nature does not care about your size or your place on the food chain. The bear breathes in the cyanide and the hydrogen sulfide. Its massive nervous system misfires, its lungs seize up, and it becomes the latest monument in the Valley of Bones. In my opinion, this is the most cruel aspect of the valley. It uses the natural instincts of hunger and survival to ensure that nothing ever leaves. The physiology of death here is a brutal, multi-staged assault on the body. Hydrogen sulfide is a gas that smells like rotten eggs, but at high concentrations, it actually paralyzes your olfactory nerves. This means that after 1 or 2 breaths, you can no longer smell the danger. You think the air has cleared, but in reality, you have just lost your only warning system. Then, the hydrogen cyanide takes over. Cyanide works by essentially suffocating you at a cellular level. It prevents your cells from using the oxygen that is in your blood. You could be gasping for air, your lungs expanding and contracting, but your body is literally dying of thirst for oxygen even as you breathe. It is a terrifying sensation called internal asphyxiation. Your heart begins to race, you lose control of your muscles, and a profound sense of panic washes over you. Within minutes, your brain shuts down, and you fall into a coma from which there is no return. If you were standing in that valley, you wouldn't even have time to scream before your legs gave out. I find it incredibly chilling that this valley is located within the Kronotsky Nature Reserve, a place meant to protect and celebrate life. It is a reminder that protection is a human concept that the Earth does not recognize. The valley is a localized environmental catastrophe that occurs every single day. The researchers who study the area have to wear high-grade military respirators and carry oxygen tanks, and they are constantly monitoring the wind speed. If the wind dies down, the gas levels spike to lethal concentrations in an instant. If the wind picks up, the gas is dispersed, and the valley becomes safe for a few minutes. This unpredictability makes it a psychological minefield. You are constantly looking at the grass, trying to see if it is moving, trying to guess if the air is currently your friend or your executioner. It is an exhausting way to exist, and it shows why the valley has remained so untouched and so lethal for so long. The visual of the valley is also a deceptive trap. Because the gas kills the bacteria and the insects that usually handle decomposition, the bodies of the animals stay fresh for much longer than they should. This is why the valley doesn't look like a typical boneyard. It looks like a place where everyone just decided to take a nap at the same time. You see the fur of the bear rippling in the breeze and the feathers of the eagle looking bright and vibrant, and your brain tells you that they might still be alive. This uncanny valley effect is what draws in more scavengers and potentially curious humans. I think there is a deep lesson here about the dangers of appearances. In the wild, pristine and deadly are often two sides of the same coin. The Kamchatka Death Valley is a place where nature has perfected the art of the ambush, using chemistry instead of camouflage. There is also a strange, quiet beauty to the place. if you can look past the horror. The contrast of the white volcanic vents, the yellow sulfur deposits, and the vibrant green grass creates a landscape that looks like a painting. It is a place of absolute silence, a silence so heavy it feels like it has a physical weight. In most forests, there is always a background noise of life, but here, the silence is a vacuum. It is the silence of a tomb. When you stand on the ridge overlooking the valley, you realize that you are looking at one of the few places on the planet where the biological world has been completely defeated by the geological world. It is a reminder that we live on a volcanic ball of rock and gas, and sometimes that ball decides to remind us who is really in charge. If a person were to wander into this valley without knowing the danger, their end would be swift and confusing. They might notice a slight headache or a feeling of dizziness, which they might attribute to the altitude or the long hike. They might smell that faint, bitter almond scent that is characteristic of cyanide. But by the time they realized they were in trouble, their coordination would already be gone. They would try to turn back and climb out of the basin, but the exertion would only make them breathe deeper, pulling more of the poison into their system. They would collapse onto the grass, their eyes looking up at the beautiful blue sky and the smoking volcanoes, unable to move a single finger. They would die surrounded by the most beautiful scenery in Russia, and within a few days, their body would attract the next fox or the next bear, continuing the cycle of the valley. In the context of our list, the Kamchatka Death Valley is the 8th entry because it represents the danger of the invisible wall. It is a chemical trap that is reset by the earth every time the wind stops blowing. It is more sophisticated than a simple predator or a hot spring because it targets the very mechanism of life, the breath. It is a place where the air itself is a weapon. If the Strid is a throat of water and Lake Nyos is a silent ghost, then Death Valley is a natural laboratory of execution. It is a place that demands a level of respect and caution that most of us are not used to giving the environment. My advice is to appreciate Kamchatka from the peaks of its volcanoes or the safety of its coastlines, but never, ever step into the quiet green valley where the bears go to sleep and never wake up. It is a masterpiece of atmospheric toxicity, and it remains one of the most beautiful and lethal secrets of the Siberian wilderness. It is the valley where silence is a warning, and every breath is a gamble with the abyss. Mount Washington, the ice ghost of New England. In the northeastern United States, specifically in the state of New Hampshire, there is a peak that, on paper, seems almost modest. Standing at just 6,288 feet, Mount Washington is a dwarf compared to the giants of the Himalayas or even the Rockies. You can take a scenic cog railway to the top, buy a souvenir t-shirt at the Summit House, and be back in time for dinner at a cozy mountain inn. Because of this accessibility, thousands of people flock to its slopes every year, many of them wearing nothing more than light jackets and sneakers. But this is the mountain's most successful and lethal lie. Mount Washington is officially known as the home of the world's worst weather, a place where Arctic conditions are compressed into a subalpine environment. It is a meteorological freak of nature where the rules of the civilized world are suspended by winds that can strip the skin from your face and temperatures that can turn a human being into a frozen statue in a matter of minutes. If you ask me, Mount Washington is the ultimate example of the Disneyfication of danger. We have built a gift shop on top of a monster, and every year, the mountain reminds us that it does not care about our tourism industry. It is a graveyard of the overconfident, a peak that kills not with height, but with a relentless, bone-chilling ferocity that has claimed over 160 lives. The science behind why this relatively small mountain is so violent is a perfect storm of geography and physics. Mount Washington sits at the intersection of 3 major storm tracks, one from the Atlantic, one from the Gulf of Mexico, and one from the Pacific and Great Lakes. These weather systems collide directly over the presidential range. Because the mountain is shaped like a giant funnel, the wind is forced over the summit through a phenomenon known as the Bernoulli effect. As the air is squeezed between the base of the clouds and the mountain peak, it must speed up to get through. This creates wind speeds that are truly astronomical. For decades, Mount Washington held the world record for the highest wind speed ever recorded by a human instrument, 231 miles per hour. That is not just a gale. That is the speed of a Category 5 hurricane or an F5 tornado. But it happens on a mountain covered in ice and jagged rocks. In my opinion, standing on that summit during a storm is the closest a human can get to standing on the wing of a jet plane in mid-flight. The wind doesn't just blow you over, it picks you up and hurls you against the granite. The physiology of an encounter with Mount Washington's extreme weather is a descent into a cold, dark hell. Let us talk about the wind chill. On a typical winter day, the temperature might be minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but with the wind howling at 80 or 100 miles per hour, the effective wind chill can drop to minus 100 degrees. At these temperatures, exposed skin freezes in less than 60 seconds. This is not the frostbite you see in movies. This is a deep, crystalline destruction of your cells. Your blood vessels constrict so violently that your extremities begin to die while you are still conscious. Your fingers turn a waxy white, then a bruised purple, and finally a necrotic black as the blood flow is cut off to save your core organs. But the cold doesn't just attack your skin, it attacks your mind. Hypothermia on Mount Washington is famous for its speed. As your core temperature drops, your brain stops functioning logically. You might experience what is called paradoxical undressing, where you feel a sudden, intense heat and begin to strip off your clothes in the middle of a blizzard. Or terminal burrowing, where you try to crawl into a tiny, useless hole in the rocks to escape a wind that is everywhere. One of the most tragic and telling stories of this mountain involves a young, elite ultramarathoner named Kate Matrasova. She was experienced, highly conditioned, and carried top-tier survival gear. She set out for a traverse of the Presidential Range, but the mountain decided to change its mood. Within hours, she was caught in a whiteout, with winds exceeding 100 miles per hour and temperatures that felt like the surface of Pluto. Despite her strength, she couldn't move against the force of the wind. She was found the next day, frozen just a short distance from safety. This is the terrifying reality of Mount Washington. You can be a world-class athlete and still be reduced to a helpless rag doll by the elements. The mountain doesn't care about your training or your expensive gear. It only cares about the laws of thermodynamics. When I think about her final moments, I imagine the sound. A roar so loud you cannot hear your own screams. A cold so intense it feels like fire. And a total loss of the horizontal and vertical world in a swirling chaos of white. The mountain is also a master of the false security trap. Because the climb starts in a lush, temperate forest, hikers often feel a sense of warmth and safety. They sweat as they climb, soaking their base layers in moisture. As they break the tree line and enter the alpine zone, they are suddenly hit by the full force of the wind. That sweat, which was a cooling mechanism in the forest, now becomes a lethal conductor of heat away from the body. This is known as the wet bulb effect, and it is the primary killer on the mountain. You are essentially being refrigerated from the inside out. By the time most people realize they are in trouble, they are already too exhausted to fight their way back down into the trees. They are trapped on the Hill of Agony, a stretch of rock where the wind is at its peak and there is nowhere to hide. I find it deeply disturbing that you can see the lights of the towns below from the very spots where people have frozen to death. You are so close to civilization, yet you are in a different world entirely. The Tuckerman Ravine is another legendary death trap on the mountain. It is a massive glacial cirque that attracts thousands of skiers and hikers. But in the winter and spring, it becomes an avalanche factory. The wind blows massive amounts of snow over the rim, creating snow pillows that can weigh hundreds of tons. A single footstep can trigger a slide that buries you under 12 feet of concrete-like snow in seconds. If the avalanche doesn't kill you, the crevasses and ice falls will. There are places in the ravine where the ice is hundreds of feet thick and can collapse without warning. It is a playground that is actively trying to swallow its visitors. I think the reason we keep going back is a mix of ego and a refusal to believe that something so small can be so powerful. We have conquered Everest with bottled oxygen and fixed ropes, so we think a mountain in New England should be a walk in the park. Mount Washington thrives on that arrogance. If you were to be caught on the summit ridge during a typical winter storm, your survival time would be measured in minutes, not hours. The wind would make it impossible to stand, forcing you to crawl on your belly over sharp, ice-coated rocks. The rime ice, a type of ice that grows into the wind, would cover your goggles, your face, and your clothes in a heavy white crust, making you look like a ghost before you even die. Your heart would struggle to pump thickening blood, and your lungs would burn from the supercooled air. Eventually, you would just stop. You would sit down behind a rock, thinking you would just rest for a second, and the mountain would weave a shroud of snow over you. When the sun comes out the next day and the tourists take the train to the top, you would be just another hidden statistic beneath the beautiful, sparkling white landscape. In the context of our list, Mount Washington is the 9th entry because it represents the danger of proximity. It is the most accessible lethal environment in North America. It proves that you don't need to go to the Amazon or the Sahara to find a place that wants to kill you. You just need to go to New Hampshire on a day when the wind decides to remind the world that it is the master. It is a masterpiece of meteorological violence, a peak that wears a crown of ice and a cape of wind. My advice to anyone visiting is to treat the mountain with the same fear you would treat a hungry polar bear. Check the forecast, respect the tree line, and remember that the gift shop at the top is a privilege, not a right. Mount Washington is a silent, frozen sentinel that has been there long before us and will be there long after we are gone, still howling its frozen defiance into the Atlantic sky. It is the most beautiful, deadly hill you will ever encounter, and it is waiting for the next person to forget their jacket. Fraser Island, the predatory garden of Queensland. If you were to look at a travel brochure for the eastern coast of Australia, you would almost certainly see a photograph of a place that looks like the absolute pinnacle of earthly paradise. Imagine a massive island made entirely of shimmering white sand, where ancient rainforests grow directly out of the dunes, and crystal clear perched lakes of pure rainwater reflect a sky that is eternally blue. This is Gari, formerly known as Fraser Island, the largest sand island in the entire world, and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It looks like the kind of place where you could wander forever with a camera in one hand and a cold drink in the other, a tropical sanctuary where the only thing you have to worry about is whether your tan is even. But behind the sapphire water and the emerald canopy, Gari is a high-definition nightmare. It is perhaps the only place on the planet where the land, the sea, and even the air seem to be in a coordinated conspiracy to remove you from the census. It is a predatory buffet where humans are the only ones not invited to the feast. If you ask me, Kagari is the ultimate test of human arrogance. We see a beach and we think vacation, but the island sees a beach and thinks killing floor. It is a beautiful, sun-drenched trap that has been designed by millions of years of isolated evolution to be perfectly hostile to anything that doesn't belong there. The deception starts the moment you step onto the sand. Because it is a sand island, there are no paved roads. You have to drive a four-wheel drive vehicle along the beach, which is also the island's official highway. But the sand is a shifting, treacherous beast. It looks solid until it doesn't. Every year, dozens of tourists find their expensive vehicles swallowed by the rising tide or flipped over in the soft, deceptive ruts of the dunes. But the mechanical danger is nothing compared to the biological one. Gari is home to the most purebred population of dingoes in Australia. These are not cute stray dogs. They are apex predators with a tactical intelligence that is genuinely terrifying. They have lived on this island for thousands of years, and they have lost all fear of humans. They don't bark, they observe. They watch you from the tree line, calculating your weaknesses and waiting for a moment of distraction. In my opinion, the dingoes of Gari are the most chilling predators on our list because they look like something we should be able to trust. We are hardwired to love dogs, and the dingo uses that biological sympathy against us. The physiology of a dingo attack is a grim reality that many families have had to face. Unlike a shark or a lion that might go for a single massive strike, dingoes are pack hunters that use exhaustion and precision. They often target the most vulnerable members of a group, children. In 2001, a young boy named Clinton Gage was walking with his brother near a campsite when two dingoes ambushed them. The animals didn't just bite, they targeted the throat and the major arteries with a surgical focus. The boy didn't stand a chance. Even more recently, dingoes have been known to snatch toddlers directly out of their parents' tents while they slept. When a dingo bites, it uses a crushing force that can snap small bones instantly, and their teeth are designed to tear flesh away from the muscle. It is a primitive, violent end that happens in the middle of a beautiful campsite, a reminder that on Kagari, you are never the top of the food chain. But if you think you can escape the land by jumping into the water, you are making a fatal mistake. The ocean surrounding Gari is quite literally a shark highway. The island sits right in the path of the migration routes for great whites, bull sharks, and tiger sharks. Because there are no reefs to break the surf, the currents are incredibly powerful, and the water is deep right up to the shore. There are no lifeguards on Gari because the ocean is considered too dangerous for swimming by everyone who knows the area. If the sharks don't get you, the irukandji jellyfish will. This is, in my opinion, the most terrifying creature in the world. It is smaller than a fingernail and nearly transparent, making it impossible to see in the water. But its sting triggers what is known as irukandji syndrome, a physiological reaction that is so painful and psychologically devastating that victims often beg doctors to kill them just to make the sensation stop. The physiology of an irukandji sting is like a descent into a bespoke circle of hell. Within 20 to 30 minutes of being touched by the invisible tentacles, your body is flooded with a massive dump of adrenaline and stress hormones. Your blood pressure skyrockets to levels that can cause a stroke or a brain hemorrhage. Every muscle in your body begins to cramp with a violence that feels like your bones are being snapped. But the most unique and horrifying symptom is the feeling of impending doom. This isn't just a metaphor, it is a clinical psychological state where the victim becomes absolutely convinced that they are about to die. They experience a level of existential terror that no drug can soothe. Imagine being in the middle of a paradise island, looking at the beautiful sunset, and suddenly feeling a physical, chemical certainty that your soul is about to be extinguished. It is a psychological execution delivered by a creature you cannot even see. The island also has a secret weapon hidden in the forest, the gimpy tree, also known as the suicide plant. It looks like a harmless shrub with large heart-shaped leaves, but those leaves are covered in millions of microscopic silicon-tipped needles filled with a powerful neurotoxin. If you even brush against it, the needles embed themselves in your skin and begin to fire poison into your nervous system. The pain has been described as being burnt with hot acid and electrocuted at the same time. The worst part? The pain can last for months or even years. Every time the skin is touched or exposed to a change in temperature, the needles reactivate, sending fresh waves of agony to the brain. There are stories of people who have shot themselves because they could not live with the relentless, unceasing pain of a gimpy sting. It is a plant that holds a grudge, a botanical nightmare that turns a simple walk in the woods into a lifelong sentence of suffering. I find it deeply symbolic that the indigenous Butchula people named this island Kagari, which means paradise. But in their legends, Kagari was a spirit who fell in love with the earth and stayed there forever, turning into the island. They always knew the island was a living thing, and they had strict rules about how to behave there. They knew that the paradise was conditional. We, in our modern world, have forgotten how to read the landscape. We see the champagne pools, beautiful rock basins where the waves foam up like wine, and we jump in without realizing that a rogue wave can wash over the rocks and drag a grown man into the shark-infested abyss in a heartbeat. We see the Maheno shipwreck on the beach, and we climb on it, ignoring the rusted, razor-sharp steel and the unstable structure. We treat the world like a theme park, but Kagari is a wild, untamed animal that has no interest in being your background for a selfie. Think about the sheer density of danger on this one island. You have the most venomous snakes in the world hiding in the dunes. You have the most aggressive wild dogs on the land. You have the most lethal sharks and jellyfish in the water. You have quicksand that can swallow a vehicle, and plants that can make you want to end your own life. It is as if nature took every high-threat element and concentrated them into a single 120-mile stretch of sand. I think the reason Gari is so high on our list is because it is the ultimate hidden-in-plain-sight killer. It doesn't look like a volcano or a frozen peak. It looks like a dream. It lures you in with the promise of rest and beauty, and then it begins to systematically test your survival skills. It is a place where you have to be vigilant about where you step, where you swim, and even what you touch. If you were to be stranded on Gari, your death would likely be a result of a cascade of small mistakes. You might get a minor sting from a plant, which causes you to stumble into a dingo's territory. Your panic might lead you to run into the water to escape the dogs, where the sharks are waiting in the rip current. It is a multi-dimensional trap. The island is the 10th entry on our list because it represents the danger of the predatory zoo. It is a place where humans are clearly not the dominant species. My advice to anyone visiting Gari is to stay in a group, never turn your back on a dingo, and for the love of everything, stay out of the ocean. Respect the Butchula laws and remember that Gari is not a park. It is a spirit that has been there for 18,000 years, and it has seen thousands of people come and go. It is a beautiful, shimmering, sand-covered grave, and it is the most spectacular place you will ever be afraid of. It is the garden where the flowers have teeth and the water has a memory. Gari is a masterpiece of Australian lethality, and it remains a place where the sun is bright, the sand is white, and the danger is absolute. Berkeley Pit, the Crimson Chalice of Montana. In the rugged mountains of Montana, right on the edge of the town of Butte, there is a landmark that looks like a portal into a bruised and broken world. From a distance, as you stand on the viewing platform, you might think you are looking at a geological wonder, or perhaps a lake of dark vintage wine. The water is a deep, unnatural crimson, shifting sometimes into a sickly emerald green or a dark, bruised purple, depending on how the light hits the surface. It is a mile long and half a mile wide, a massive liquid eye staring back at the sky from the depths of a scarred earth. It is so striking and so massive that it has become a tourist attraction, with people paying a small fee just to stand on the edge and peer into the abyss. But this is not a product of nature's beauty. It is a monument to industrial greed and a man-made nightmare that is quite literally one of the most toxic bodies of water on the entire planet. This is the Berkeley Pit, and it is a liquid graveyard where the laws of biology are suspended in favor of a lethal chemical cocktail. If you ask me, there is something deeply poetic and terrifying about the fact that we have spent centuries digging for wealth, only to leave behind a hole filled with a poison so potent that it can dissolve the life right out of anything that touches it. It is the richest hill on Earth turned into the most expensive grave. The story of the Berkeley Pit is a cautionary tale of what happens when we strip the Earth of its treasures without a plan for the aftermath. For decades, starting in 1955, this was a bustling open-pit copper mine. It was the heart of the American industrial machine, providing the copper that wired a nation. But to get to that copper, miners had to pump out billions of gallons of groundwater every single day to keep the pit from flooding. When the pumps were finally turned off in 1982, the water began to reclaim the void. As the water rose, it didn't just fill the hole. It reacted with the exposed rock, which was rich in pyrite and other sulfide minerals. This created a massive, ongoing chemical reaction known as acid mine drainage. The water turned into a concentrated solution of sulfuric acid, and as it sat there, it began to dissolve the heavy metals left in the walls of the pit. Copper, arsenic, cadmium, zinc, and iron were all pulled into the water, turning it into a heavy metallic soup that is as corrosive as it is colorful. The chemistry of the Berkeley Pit is a masterclass in toxicity. The pH level of the water sits around 2.5. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the same acidity as lemon juice or stomach acid. On its own, that might just give you a nasty chemical burn. But the Berkeley Pit is not just acidic, it is saturated with dissolved metals. The concentration of copper is so high that researchers have actually experimented with mining the water itself to pull out the metal. This makes the water a powerful electrolyte, a liquid that conducts electricity and dissolves organic matter with terrifying efficiency. If you were to fall into the Berkeley pit, you would not just drown, you would be chemically processed. The acid would immediately begin to react with the proteins in your skin and eyes, causing instant, blinding burns. As you struggled to stay afloat, the heavy metals would be absorbed through your skin and your respiratory system, triggering an acute toxic shock that would shut down your kidneys and your liver in a matter of hours. In my opinion, it is a liquid fire that disguises itself as a peaceful lake. The most famous and tragic victims of the Berkeley pit are not humans, but the migratory birds that mistake it for a safe harbor. In November of 1995, a massive flock of snow geese was forced down by a storm and landed on the red waters of the pit. They thought they were landing on a lake. They were actually landing in a vat of industrial waste. The next morning, the surface of the water was littered with the white bodies of 342 geese. When scientists performed autopsies on the birds, the results were the stuff of horror movies. Their esophagi and stomachs were lined with chemical burns. Their feathers were matted with a metallic sludge that made it impossible for them to fly or stay warm. Their internal organs were riddled with lethal doses of copper and cadmium. It was a mass execution of innocent creatures who were just looking for a place to rest. But nature is a strange beast, and even in a place as lethal as the Berkeley pit, life finds a way to adapt. Scientists have discovered extremophile bacteria and fungi living in the pit that exist nowhere else on Earth. These organisms don't just survive the toxic soup, they thrive on it, eating the metals and the acid to produce energy. Some of these fungi have shown promise in the fight against cancer, proving that even in the heart of a man-made disaster, there are secrets of survival. This contrast is what makes the pit so fascinating to me. It is a place of total death for the complex and the beautiful, but a cradle of life for the invisible and the strange. It is a reminder that the Earth will continue long after we have finished destroying it, even if the only things left are the things that like the taste of acid. The danger of the Berkeley pit is not just confined to the hole itself. Because it is an unlined pit, the water levels are constantly monitored. If the water rises too high, it could potentially crest the critical water level and begin to flow backward into the regional groundwater supply. This would contaminate the drinking water for the entire town of Butte and the surrounding valley, creating an environmental catastrophe of epic proportions. To prevent this, a massive water treatment plant was built to pump and treat the water indefinitely. It is a perpetual maintenance project, a bill that the Earth has presented to humanity and that we will be paying forever. We have created a monster that requires a life support system just to keep it from killing us. I think this is the ultimate irony of our industrial age. We spent decades making a profit from the mine, and now we will spend centuries spending that profit just to keep the mine from poisoning our children. In 2016, another tragedy struck. Thousands of snow geese, numbering between 3,000 and 10,000, were forced into the pit by another late-season storm. Despite the efforts of workers using high-tech noisemakers and spotlights to scare them away, the birds landed in the dark. The resulting carnage was so massive that it made international headlines. It was a grim reminder that the pit is still active, still hungry, and still a trap for anything that doesn't understand the chemical nature of its beauty. I find it deeply disturbing that we can build something so large and so lethal that even our best efforts to protect wildlife are often useless. The pit is a passive predator. It doesn't hunt, it just waits for you to make a mistake. The physiology of death in the pit for these birds is a slow and agonizing process. When they land, the acid begins to strip away the natural oils from their feathers. These oils are what keep the birds buoyant and insulated. Once the oil is gone, the cold water reaches their skin, and they begin to suffer from hypothermia. As they preen their feathers to try and fix the damage, they ingest the toxic water. The sulfuric acid sears their throat and the lining of their stomach, causing internal bleeding. The heavy metals then enter their bloodstream, leading to a total systemic collapse. They die of a combination of drowning, poisoning, and cold, all while floating in a liquid that looks like a beautiful sunset. It is a multidimensional assault on the very concept of life. In the context of our list, the Berkeley Pit is the 11th entry, because it is the only one that is entirely our fault. It is not a volcanic accident or a geological freak of nature. It is a scar that we carved into the face of the planet and then filled with our own waste. It represents the danger of unintended consequences. We wanted copper, and we got a lake of acid. It is a reminder that every action we take on this planet has a chemical and physical reaction that can last for generations. The Berkeley Pit is a masterpiece of industrial horror, a vibrant red warning sign that stands as a witness to our past and a threat to our future. When you stand on that viewing platform and look down at the red water, you are not just looking at a mine. You are looking at the dark side of the human spirit. You are looking at our ability to transform the Earth into something that is no longer recognizable as a home. My advice to anyone who visits Butte is to look at the pit, but look at it with the respect you would give to a ticking bomb. It is a beautiful, shimmering, metallic nightmare that sits on the edge of a human community, a silent reminder that the Earth has a long memory and a very sharp bite. The Berkeley Pit is the crimson chalice of Montana, and it is a drink that nobody can survive. It is a place where the water is a weapon and the history is a warning. It is the most beautiful chemical disaster you will ever see, and it is waiting for the next storm to bring it a new flock of victims. The Blue Hole of Dahab, the hypnotic void of the Red Sea. If you travel to the edge of the Sinai Desert in Egypt, where the golden sands meet the deep turquoise of the Red Sea, you will find a place that is whispered about in every dive shop from London to Tokyo. It is a perfect circle of dark sapphire water, carved into the coastal reef like a giant, unblinking eye staring up at the sun. This is the Blue Hole of Dahab, and it is widely considered the most dangerous dive site on the face of the Earth. From the surface, it looks like a sanctuary, a calm and sheltered pool protected from the waves of the open ocean. It is a place of breathtaking coral gardens and shimmering schools of tropical fish. But as you descend into that deep blue center, the atmosphere shifts from a tropical vacation to a haunting, silent cathedral of death. It has earned the grim nickname, the Diver's Cemetery, and if you walk along the shore, you will see the evidence of its hunger. Stone plaques carved with the names of young men and women from all over the world who went down into that blue light and never came back. If you ask me, the Blue Hole is the ultimate psychological predator. It doesn't use acid or heat or poison to kill you. It uses your own brain, your own ego, and a phenomenon known as the rapture of the deep to lure you into a permanent embrace. The reason for the Blue Hole's lethality is a geological feature known as the arch. At a depth of about 52 meters, which is roughly 170 feet, there is a massive tunnel that connects the Blue Hole to the open ocean. It is an underwater bridge of stone that looks like something out of a dream. From inside the hole, the light from the open sea shines through the arch, creating a glowing, hypnotic blue gateway that seems to promise an incredible adventure. For a recreational diver, the sight is irresistible. But this is the trap. 52 meters is far beyond the safe limit for recreational diving, which usually caps at 30 or 40 meters. To go that deep, you are not just fighting the water, you are fighting the very chemistry of your own blood. The Blue Hole is a place where the laws of biology begin to warp under the weight of the ocean, and where a single moment of curiosity can turn into a terminal mistake. The primary killer at the Blue Hole is a phenomenon called nitrogen narcosis, often referred to by divers as the martini effect. As you descend deeper, the increasing pressure causes the nitrogen in your air tank to enter your bloodstream and brain in a way that mimics the effects of heavy alcohol or narcotics. For every 15 meters of depth, it is said to be equivalent to drinking one dry martini on an empty stomach. By the time you reach the arch, you are effectively drunk. You feel a sense of intense euphoria, a feeling of invincibility and joy. You stop worrying about your air supply. You stop checking your depth gauge, and you begin to lose your sense of direction. I find it deeply chilling that nature has designed a way to make you feel happy while you are dying. In the grip of narcosis, divers have been known to take out their regulators and try to give them to a fish, or simply decide to swim deeper into the dark because the blue light looks so beautiful. Your survival instinct is simply switched off by the chemistry of the deep. The physiology of death in the blue hole is a slow, confused descent into the dark. When a diver decides to attempt the arch, they often underestimate the distance and the depth. Because the water is so clear, the bottom of the tunnel looks much closer than it actually is. As the diver swims into the arch, they often encounter a strong downward current or realize too late that the tunnel is much longer than they thought. Under the influence of nitrogen narcosis, they don't realize they are breathing through their air supply at double or triple the normal rate because of the high pressure. When they finally reach the other side and look up at the surface, they are over 200 feet down. At that depth, the air in their tank becomes thick and difficult to pull through the regulator. Panic begins to set in. But in the deep ocean, panic is a death sentence. The diver begins to breathe even faster. Their heart rate skyrockets, and they quickly reach a state of total exhaustion and carbon dioxide toxicity. The most famous and haunting tragedy of the Blue Hole is the story of Yuri Lipsky, a Russian diving instructor who attempted to dive the hole alone in the year 2000. Yuri was wearing a helmet camera, and he captured his final minutes in a video that has since become a terrifying piece of educational history for the diving community. In the video, you can see the moment the narcosis takes hold. He descends far too quickly, ignoring his gauges as the light begins to fade. He reaches the bottom at over 90 meters, nearly 300 feet, a depth that is unsurvivable on a standard air tank. You can hear the sound of his heavy, panicked breathing and the beeping of his computer. He becomes disoriented in the silt, unable to tell which way is up. Eventually, the video shows him removing his mask in a state of total delirium before the screen goes dark. It is a raw, unedited look at a human life being extinguished by the indifference of the void. To me, that video is the ultimate warning sign. It shows that even the most experienced people can be unmade by the pressure of the blue hole. The physical environment of the arch itself adds another layer of danger. Because the tunnel is so large and the light is so deceptive, many divers think they can swim through it on a single breath or without proper technical training. But the arch is a massive heat sink. Even in the warm Red Sea, at those depths, the water begins to sap the heat from your body. Your coordination slows down and your thinking becomes sluggish. If you get lost in the shadows of the tunnel, you have no way to quickly ascend to the surface. You are trapped under a ceiling of solid rock, and the only way out is through a maze of stone that all looks the same in the dim light. I think the blue hole is so high on our list because it represents the danger of the siren call. It doesn't look like a place of death. It looks like a place of wonder. It invites you to push your limits, to see what is around the corner, and then it quietly closes the door behind you. I find it incredibly moving to stand on the shore at Dahab and look at the memorial plaques. They are written in dozens of different languages, but they all tell the same story. A story of a young life full of passion and adventure that was cut short by a few minutes of overconfidence. The local Bedouin people who live in the area have a deep respect for the hole. They tell stories of a curse, but the truth is far more scientific and far more terrifying. The curse is just the way the human body reacts to pressure and gas. There are no ghosts in the blue hole, only the silence of the deep and the remains of those who forgot that we are land animals who are only guests in the water. If you were to survive a near miss in the blue hole, the aftermath would be almost as bad as the dive itself. To return from those depths, you have to undergo hours of decompression stops to allow the nitrogen to slowly leave your tissues. If you ascend too quickly in a panic, the nitrogen forms bubbles in your blood and joints, a condition known as the bends. It can cause permanent paralysis, brain damage, or a painful death as your blood literally begins to boil with gas bubbles. This is why the blue hole is a trap with no easy escape. Once you are deep enough to see the beauty of the arch, you are already committed to a journey that your body might not be able to finish. It is a masterpiece of subaquatic terror, a blue abyss that has seen the end of over 100 lives and continues to draw in the curious every single year. In the context of our list, the blue hole is the 12th entry because it represents the danger of the beautiful void. It is a psychological executioner. It doesn't need to be a volcano or a desert to kill you. It just needs to be a little bit deeper than you think. It is a reminder that our senses were not evolved for the deep ocean. We are out of our element the moment we leave the light of the sun. The blue hole is a sapphire grave, a place of haunting beauty where the silence is absolute and the blue is eternal. My advice to anyone visiting Dahab is to enjoy the reef, look at the fish, and stay well away from the center. The arch is not a gateway to adventure. It is a gateway to a world where you do not belong. It is a place where the water is a drug and the light is a lie. The blue hole remains the most lethal and hypnotic wonder of the Red Sea, a silent witness to the hubris of man and the cold, crushing power of the deep. It is the eye of the earth, and it never blinks. Rainbow Valley, the graveyard of the highest peak. We have traveled from the boiling rivers of the Amazon to the acidic lakes of Ethiopia and the sapphire voids of the Red Sea. But our final destination is a place that sits at the very edge of the world, where the air is so thin it can no longer support human life, and the wind carries the screams of the mountain itself. This is the northeast ridge of Mount Everest, specifically a stretch of the mountainside just below the summit known as Rainbow Valley. To anyone else, a name like Rainbow Valley would suggest a place of joy, a vibrant field of flowers, or a spectacular light show in the clouds. But on the highest mountain on Earth, the name is a piece of black humor shared by the elite climbing community. The rainbows here are not made of light or water. They are the bright, synthetic colors of the high-altitude parkas and gear worn by the dozens of climbers who have died there and whose bodies remain frozen in place, perfectly preserved by the eternal frost. It is a literal field of corpses, a high-altitude morgue where the dead serve as landmarks for the living. If you ask me, Rainbow Valley is the ultimate monument to human vanity and the cold, crushing indifference of the universe. It is a place where you are forced to realize that no matter how much money you spend or how much training you do, you are nothing but a fragile bag of carbon and water in a world of ice and stone. To understand the horror of Rainbow Valley, you have to understand the science of what mountaineers call the death zone. This is the area above 8,000 meters, which is approximately 26,000 feet. At this altitude, the partial pressure of oxygen is only about 1/3 of what it is at sea level. This is not just thin air. This is a biological dead end. Your body cannot survive here for more than a few hours. Even with bottled oxygen, your cells are dying faster than they can replicate. Your digestive system shuts down because your body is diverting all its energy to your heart and brain. Your blood begins to thicken with an overproduction of red blood cells in a desperate attempt to carry more oxygen, turning your circulatory system into a sluggish river of sludge. This makes you incredibly susceptible to strokes, heart attacks, and blood clots in the lungs. In the death zone, you are a ghost who hasn't stopped walking yet. You are a biological machine that is running out of fuel and oxygen at the same time, and every step toward the summit is a step closer to a total systemic collapse. The physiology of death on Everest is a slow, agonizing descent into madness and physical failure. First comes high-altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE. Because of the pressure changes, the capillaries in your lungs begin to leak fluid into the air sacs. You start to cough up a pink, frothy foam, and it feels like you are drowning from the inside out while standing in a frozen desert. Then comes high-altitude cerebral edema, or HACE. This is even more terrifying. Your brain begins to swell against the inside of your skull, causing a cascade of neurological failures. You lose your coordination, you begin to hallucinate, and your judgment vanishes. Climbers in the grip of HACE have been known to sit down in the snow and start undressing because they think they are in a warm bed, or they start talking to people who aren't there. This is often when summit fever takes hold. The climber becomes so obsessed with reaching the top that they ignore every warning sign from their body and the environment. They move past the point of no return, and when their oxygen runs out or the sun begins to set, they simply sit down and wait for the end. In Rainbow Valley, these victims don't just disappear. Because it is too dangerous and expensive to recover bodies from such extreme altitudes, they remain exactly where they fell. The most famous of these is the figure known as Green Boots. For nearly 20 years, the body of an Indian climber believed to be Tsewang Paljor lay in a limestone cave on the main trail. He was curled in a fetal position, wearing bright lime green climbing boots. Every single person who climbed the north side of the mountain had to literally step over his legs to reach the summit. He became a landmark, a macabre mile marker. People didn't say, "Go to the cave." They said, "Turn left at Green Boots." To me, this is the most disturbing aspect of Everest. We have turned a human being into a piece of navigation. It shows how the mountain strips away our empathy. In the death zone, your survival is so precarious that you cannot afford to care about anyone else. If someone is dying 10 feet away from you, you likely don't have the strength to help them, and if you try, you will probably die with them. You are forced to make the most cold-hearted decisions imaginable just to keep your own heart beating. Another haunting story is that of Frances Arsentiev, known as the Sleeping Beauty of Everest. In 1998, she became the first American woman to reach the summit without bottled oxygen. But on the way down, she became separated from her husband and was found the next day by another climbing team. She was still alive, but was suffering from severe frostbite and HACE. She was unable to move. The team spent an hour trying to help her, but as their own oxygen ran low and the wind picked up, they had to make the agonizing choice to leave her. Her last words to them were, "Don't leave me." For 9 years, her body lay on the side of the trail, visible to everyone, her skin turned a waxy, translucent white by the sun and the wind. She looked like a marble statue sleeping in the snow. It wasn't until 2007 that the same climber who had left her returned to give her a proper burial, moving her body out of sight of the trail. This is the reality of Rainbow Valley. It is a gallery of the fallen, where the victims of ambition are put on permanent display for the next wave of dreamers. I think the reason Everest is the final entry on our list is because it represents the peak of human ego. We pay $75,000 for the chance to stand on a patch of snow for 10 minutes, and we are willing to risk everything to do it. The rainbow of jackets in that valley is a visual representation of that cost. It is a place where the mountain has said no to the best equipped and most determined people on the planet. The ethics of the Everest climbing industry are a dark and complicated web. We have turned a sacred mountain into a high-altitude theme park where the entrance fee is paid in blood. Every year, the queues to reach the summit get longer, and as people stand in line at 8,000 meters, their bodies are slowly dying. Their oxygen is ticking down, and they are surrounded by the frozen remains of those who stood in the same line years before. It is a slow-motion catastrophe that happens every spring. If you were to die in Rainbow Valley, your experience would be one of profound loneliness and sensory overload. The wind on the ridge can reach 200 miles per hour, making a sound like a freight train that never stops. The cold is so intense that if you touch metal with your bare hand, the skin is ripped off instantly. You would feel a desperate, heavy fatigue that is more powerful than any drug. You would think to yourself that you just need 5 minutes of sleep, and as soon as you closed your eyes, the mountain would take you. Your body wouldn't rot. The bacteria can't survive there either. You would simply desiccate, the moisture being sucked out of your tissues by the dry Arctic air until you became a mummified shell. You would become a new color in the valley, a new landmark for the next season's climbers to look at as they gasp for breath. In my opinion, the most terrifying thing about Everest isn't the height or the cold, it's the indifference. The mountain is not trying to kill you. It isn't angry, and it isn't a monster. It is just a massive pile of rock and ice that happens to reach into a part of the atmosphere where humans don't belong. It is the ultimate no trespassing sign from nature. Rainbow Valley is the proof that we ignored that sign. It is the final entry on our list because it combines every element of danger we have discussed: extreme temperature, low pressure, toxic physiology, and psychological traps. It is the end of the line. We have seen how nature can be an artist of the macabre, using water, acid, heat, and cold to create traps for the unwary. From the deceptive calm of Jacob's Well to the psychedelic acid of the Denacle and the silent gas of Lake Nyos, the Earth is a complex and often lethal place. But Everest and its Rainbow Valley remind us that the greatest danger of all is often our own ambition. We are the ones who choose to walk into the kiln, to dive into the void, and to climb into the death zone. Nature just provides the stage. We provide the tragedy. As we conclude this journey through the most deadly natural wonders of the world, I want you to remember that beauty is often a warning. The most spectacular colors, the clearest waters, and the most magnificent peaks are the ones that demand the most from us. If you ever find yourself standing at the edge of one of these places, listen to that small voice in the back of your mind, the one that feels the chill and senses the danger. That is your biological history trying to keep you alive. Respect the boundaries of the natural world, and remember that some places are meant to be seen from a distance and never touched. The Earth is beautiful, but it is not a playground. It is a powerful, ancient system that was here long before we arrived and will remain long after the last rainbow in the valley has faded into white. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark side of our planet, make sure to leave a comment about which of these locations terrified you the most. Are you brave enough to visit the boiling river, or would you rather take your chances on the slopes of Mount Washington? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the mysteries and dangers of our incredible world. Hit that notification bell so you can stay informed about our next expedition into the unknown. Until next time, stay curious, stay respectful of the wild, and most importantly, stay safe. The world is full of wonders, but not all of them want you to come home. This has been your guide to the most beautiful ways the Earth can kill you. Goodbye for now, and watch your step out there.